My name is Danielle Carver, and I was 36 years old the year my family realized the value of life. I was in the cemetery, my shoes on the wet grass, with 2 new burial plots in front of me, and the phone clipped to my coat began to ring. My husband, Tom, was in one. My daughter, Lily, was 6 years old, and she was in the other. My parents and brother didn't attend the funeral at all. They called it a trivial matter not worth attending. Then they flew to Hawaii together the next morning. 5 days after I was buried in the world, my mother called me to tell me to stop crying and asked me for money. Then she told me I would never call her mother again. Welcome to Quiet Drama Stories, where ordinary women face difficult families and deal with them with quiet strength, not shouting. If you feel a little lonely after reading this story, you've come to the right place. So sit back, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe, because this story begins during the worst week of my life and ends in a place I never expected. These days I wake up at 4 in the morning. The house is dark behind me as I drive down the dirt road, and I don't turn on the kitchen light because no one is looking. The first thing I touch every morning is cold metal. The seatbelt buckles in the car are warm in my hand, and the smell of gasoline and old coffee wafts from the taxi. About 20 minutes before sunrise, all I could feel was the wind. I'd been driving long distances for 11 years before this happened. People at the truck stops assumed the owner was my husband, so I let them in because it was easier than explaining. Tom thought it was the funniest thing in the world. He ordered a cake and watched as an officer handed me a note that had been prepared for him. The man smiled when he realized it was a picture of the woman his boss had smeared under his fingernails. I still keep his coffee cup in the taxi, but I don't drink from it. I like to know he's there when the shooting starts, like he used to be. People think grief is difficult. It's mostly just a pile of little things you're trying to find someone in, but you can't reach anything. Near the cabin door are a pair of yellow rubber boots Lily put down. I didn't move them. I told myself I'd go. Then it was 4 o'clock, but I still didn't move them. Another family had been coming home 11 months earlier. I want to tell you how I lost them. But first, I have to tell you how those who share my blood decided they had a better place. It rained for 3 days that spring, the kind of rain that turns a stream into a wall of water in 20 minutes. When my phone rang at a gas station in Ohio, I was driving a refrigerated truck 500 miles east, transporting products I didn't even know existed. Tom picked up Lily from her grandmother's early because of the bad weather. He was a careful man, a traffic expert of 20 years, who had never received a traffic ticket, the kind for running a yellow light when the truck behind him was making noise. The highway was flooded, so he took the country road home. There was a low, lying water crossing near Henley Farm. A small concrete ditch ran beneath the road, through which the stream flowed. No one would have suspected its existence on a dry day. That day, the water level rose to the top of the ditch as it surged toward the junction. The car was found 60 kilometers away, wedged behind familiar bushes. 2 days later, after the water had finally receded, I won't recount the rest. Some things shouldn't be told, and Lily was only 6 years old. She deserved better than to be just another sad detail in a story. All I can say is that I drove home for 9 hours straight without sleep, my hands shaking on the steering wheel as I did all the calculations. If I had refused that trip, if I had driven myself, if I had taught Tom to be afraid of that crossing, I would have been back in town before I even got there. Sharp objects on my porch, a police car in my yard. I'd fasted for 9 hours in 4 states. And I was still 9 hours behind. The first call I made before saying those words was to my mother. I wondered if anyone in the world would come. My mother's first question was if the funeral could be postponed for 2 weeks. I remember sitting on the kitchen floor with the phone in my hand, wondering if I'd heard something wrong. She and my father were planning a trip. Hawaiian, she said. I'm going to spend 8 days with my brother Nathan, his wife Mallory, and their grandchildren. The trip had been on the calendar since January. A deposit had been paid. I told her that my wife and daughter had passed away. She said she understood how a coworker who missed a deadline felt. Then Mallory took the initiative to write the text message in the family group, as she always initiates conversations. She wrote, "Of course everyone is very sad. But the tickets are non-refundable and the children were really looking forward to them. And I don't want them to cancel their entire holiday because of a text message I wrote for all of us to read." A minor incident that shouldn't be mentioned at the meeting. I read that line 4 times. A minor incident, my son's funeral. My mother's response 2 minutes later was very acceptable, and the wording was consistent. No one asked me how Lily died. They didn't ask me for Tom's middle name, not while I was eating at that house, nor when I was alone, wearing yellow shoes, looking at the gravestone. They asked me which week would be most convenient for them. I stopped asking. I told them the funeral would be on Saturday, and that their attendance was optional. Then I hung up and never called them again. For the first time in my life, I realized a certain coldness and innocence in the hearts of those who raised me. They won't choose me. They haven't chosen me for 36 years. Strangely, that didn't bother me. It gave me the freedom to think about what was to come. The front seat is reserved for family. At Tom and Lily's funeral, the front seat was empty, and since the second row passengers were already there, I chose to sit there. My Uncle Ernest drove 4 hours from Joplin, always standing by my side with his arm around my shoulder, like a man gripping a hedge in a storm. The church was packed. Tom's officers were there in their shirts. The women who worked at the restaurant were there. Lily's kindergarten teacher came, and she cried even more than I did. The entire football team was there in their blue jerseys, because Tom coached them on Saturdays. My parents were at the beach. My brother was at the beach. The benches were empty and clean, and 100 workers were gathered side by side to say goodbye to a truck driver and a little girl. I gave the farewell speech myself. I trusted no one else. I said that Tom had slowed down at the yellow light, and I said that Lily preferred painting trucks to painting princesses. I said it was the best thing I'd ever made, and the one thing I couldn't handle. I didn't mention the empty seat, and I shouldn't have, because everyone in the room could have seen it. Then Ernest walked me to my car and said the only honest thing any member of my family had said that whole month. "Danielle, they're not coming back to you. Not really. You have to plan your life as if it were real." I buried my wife and daughter with those who came. And as I stood there, by the 2 hotspots, the phone in my coat started ringing. My mother's name was Honolulu. I let it fall onto the wet grass, still not knowing what she was asking me. She called me back 5 days later because I was so tired that there was no time left to ask, "How are you?" or, "Sorry, I didn't hear you." There was the sound of the wind in the background, and the airport announcement, and I heard my mother's voice, like a woman calling about a late bill. "Danielle, we need to talk about money." I sat down and asked her how much. She said $40,000. It was clear from her tone that I needed to know the amount immediately. Then she told me that salesman Nathan was in trouble, that the family needed to stick together, and that I needed to understand the financial situation. Without a quick reply, she said something that will stay with me for the rest of my life. "Danielle, we can always make more money, but we can't have more families." The girl who was underground told me this, because her family didn't want to fly back. She told me from Honolulu Airport, sand still in her shoes, asking me for 40 of Zalozan to rescue the girl who was lying on the beach when my little girl drowned underground. I hid the phone in front of me and looked at the 2 yellow shoes by the door. I wondered how someone could take away the most beautiful word in the language, family, from someone they had abandoned. I almost laughed, and I almost fell into something worse. Instead, I asked him a calm question. "What do you think about the $40,000? There was a hush in the class, a silence that suggested someone had already figured out the exact amount he owed, but hadn't yet spoken. And yet, through that silence, I began to fully understand the amount he owed and how wrong he was. This amount is $40,000. 4 years ago, before this happened, I stopped driving other people's trucks and wanted to buy one. A used tractor in good condition cost me about $90,000. I had saved most of it, but I was short on cash, and Tom and I needed a bank loan to cover the difference. The lender looked at my down payment and asked me where the $40,000 came from, because that's what lenders usually do. I received it from my parents years ago. They gave me money for Nathan one Christmas. They felt it was a kind and important gesture and considered it a gift for my future. The bank doesn't just take your word for it. When the bank receives part of the deposit from family members, they require them to sign a letter. It's a genuine document. It states that the money is a true gift, not to be returned, and has no personal purpose, nor ever has. I didn't hesitate for a moment. I personally delivered the documents to my parents' house, sat at the kitchen table, and watched my mother and father sign the papers to buy my car. Then I put it down with the loan papers and forgot it existed. Just as one forgets something they don't want until the day they desperately want it. My mother forgot about it too. Or perhaps she decided it no longer mattered, because now, 4 years later, with Nathan drowned and my whole life buried in the grave, she reminds herself of that gift again. It wasn't a gift, it was an investment. She thought it was an investment the family could repay whenever they wanted. She had no idea what was in my filing cabinet. Nathan called me the next day to finish what my mother had started. My brother was 33 and had been financially secure his whole life, which meant he was my parents' main breadwinner. He opened a car dealership 2 years ago with no capital, and now he's burdened with car loans, and the showroom yard is full of trucks no one wants to buy. He didn't even ask about Lil. He was honest with the dealership owner, then with his family, and then he told me everything. I told him, "Listen, Danielle, you're all alone now. Why do you need this?" I left him hanging in midair. You're all alone now. My husband and son, and my other son, helped me as much as they could. As if grief could bring back money. Then Mallory texted me, because she couldn't bear the silence anymore. I wrote that the family money was a shared reserve I had previously drawn from, and now it was someone else's turn, and that my stance was hurting everyone. A shared reserve? I've repaid my parents' generosity in hundreds of ways over the years. But you can't repay someone who's overstepped their bounds. The worst part is that I didn't even ask. The worst part was hearing from my cousin a week later that they'd told their whole family their story. Poor Nathan, who was so stubborn and selfish, and Danielle, who just sat on the floor refusing to lift a finger to help her. They'd made up the story before I could even say. No. They just want me to be the villain. I decided then that I wouldn't argue with their story. I'd survive this. I want to tell you that I never hesitated. I'm lying. There's one thing I do, and one thing most of you do. I'd rather carry the burden myself than be part of the show. I've been everyone's go-to-guy since I was 9 years old, when I used to make Nathan's lunch because our mom was tired. One night, a week after I started making calls, I sat down in front of my checkbook. $40,000 would have emptied my wallet, but it would have stopped the phone ringing. I was tired of it, and just wanted it to stop. Ernest saw me doing that, so he came over and fixed things that didn't need fixing, and he even fixed Tom's chair so it wouldn't sit empty. He saw the checkbook open on the table and didn't cry. "You're really going to write this, aren't you?" I said. "You're going to pay them not to come to your funeral." Then I put my pen down, because I was right. I wasn't afraid of being called ungrateful. I was a man who could fix things, so I could fix what was wrong. If you're someone everyone trusts but no one truly appreciates, then stay with me, because this is the moment I stopped keeping people around who wouldn't even bother to visit my son's grave. If you're one of those people, comment and subscribe, because that's why I'm telling you this instead of writing that check. I put down my pen and closed my book, and the next morning, at 4 a.m, I did something I'll never be ashamed of. I went to work. Going back to work meant facing everyone who thought I'd lose money without Tom. The bank employee in charge of my credit line asked me, in a friendly tone that was actually quite rude, if I'd ever considered selling the machine for its actual value. A freight forwarder I'd worked with for years suddenly began to doubt the viability of his business, given all the circumstances. I heard from an outsider that 2 of them had informed the carriers they wouldn't be extending the season. A grieving widow owns a few trucks. They've already started leaving. My keys were cold in my hand every morning, and sometimes the cold was the only thing holding me back. But I accepted it as if it were the last thing I had in the world, because it was. Then Glenda found me. She was in her 60s, had worked as a freight forwarder for a regional carrier for 30 years, and knew more about shipping than any of those middlemen. She took me to the parking lot, bought me eggs, and gave me some business advice I desperately needed. Mar said, "From now on, people will either cooperate with you or work against you. There are no third parties. Don't wait for suspects to come forward. Make them irrelevant." And I did. I called every informant Tom trusted and told them the truth. The shop owner, as usual, was a woman with oiled fingernails. She returned at the appointed time. I was working harder than anyone else. About 3 weeks later, a huge contract for 2 trucks landed in. A regional grocery chain, constant traffic, a lot of money. The kind of contract that would build a company. All I had to do was be brave enough to accept it. And to get that contract, I needed a second truck, fast. So I started cleaning Tom's old truck to sell it and make some money. It was very dear to him and he kept it spotless. Even today, it still has oil stains. A little plastic horse named Lily was glued to the dashboard. My dad had a friend. I sat in the truck's cab for an hour before I touched anything. Then I slowly began to unpack the sleeping man's pockets, his sunglasses, a church notice, coins from the air conditioner, and a travel journal that was hidden under a folded map at the bottom of the door pocket. The law now states that it cannot be stored electronically. It's the old paper I used to have. Written in pencil, 20 years of his life. Every round, every mile, carefully written in large letters. I held it and couldn't open it. It felt like opening my hand. I told myself I'd read it later when I regained my strength, and I placed it on the passenger seat next to my coffee cup and my little plastic horse. But when I picked it up, I saw something. The last page wasn't just a small number, it was writing. It wasn't just a notebook, his handwriting filled the lines. He'd written something there before he died, and I hadn't known. Now he was sitting there waiting for me, just a couple of feet away. I took him with me in the passenger seat and drove home. I want to tell you the truth. I dreaded that page. Part of me knew that what Tom was going to write would change my path, and I wasn't sure I was ready for that change. It took me another 3 days to open it. While the magazine lay unopened on the kitchen table, my family was working for me. Mallory spearheaded the campaign because she treats family as a brand. I received daily text messages reminding me of everything my parents had done for me. He asked, sounding concerned, if I had received any help to ease my grief. He sent me pictures of Nathan's children, and wrote me a statement explaining how they could lose their home, just as theirs and my late son's home had been in the same situation. He worked hard for his family. My cousin Renee called me and told me what had happened, that I had taken the money and abandoned my family, that my grief had made me cruel, that my parents were saddened by my cruelty, and that some parents had laughed when I opened a coffin the size of a child. That completely changed everything. According to their version of events, they were the ones who suffered, and I was the one to blame for not helping their sick brother. For a day, I felt incredibly foolish, because a lie repeated by many, like the weather, becomes an inescapable reality. Then the truth dawned on me. They didn't want to stop on their own. Those who rewrite history don't deliberately portray themselves as victims. Renee, for her own sake, didn't believe it. "I was at that funeral, Danny," she said. "I saw the empty seat. I'm not crazy." My first thought was that someone from that family was in the same room as me and saw the truth. I don't know how much I need yet, but I've added it to my ever-growing list of necessities, alongside the gift card, alongside my travel journal. Renee called me again on a Thursday, and her voice was different. It was low and quiet, like the voices people use when they're telling you something they don't understand. She said they were planning something. My parents' 40th wedding anniversary was just around the corner. A big party was being held in the church hall, and the whole family was invited. I hadn't planned on going, but Renee was sitting at my aunt's kitchen table, while my mother and Mallory were getting ready. They were going to hug me in front of everyone. My father, Ray, would stand during the family toasts and prayers, and they would expose me to danger in front of everyone, portraying me as a wayward daughter who refused to help her family in their time of need. I would either give in to the pressure from the 40 family members watching me, or I would refuse, which they said proved I was a heartless woman. However, in the end they won. It was a trap with 2 exits, both leading to what they wanted. Renee thought I should stay away from it. Stay home. Stay safe. Not give them the chance. And for a moment, I thought I should. Then a feeling of calm and serenity washed over me, just as the brakes began to wear off, and I started driving fearlessly. On the edge of the mountain. They wanted an audience. 40 people, the whole family, gathered in a room to watch me put myself in my place. But an audience has 2 faces. They were setting a stage for my humiliation. I began to wonder what else she could do with a stage, a room full of witnesses, and a truth no one wanted to acknowledge. That night, I opened the last page of Tom's diary. I poured the coffee I hadn't drunk, sat down at the table, turned around, and there it was. The letter had been written a week before he died. It wasn't a love letter. Tom wasn't the type to write love letters. It was just a list. He named everything as he did. Simple and straightforward. Things we do, we buy our own equipment. We pay for it. We don't deal with banks. We write our name on the door, not someone else's. Then I said, "Shut up, Carver and the girl." And that's how Lily grew up, knowing that her mother had built something. He was the one who wrote our company name. It's a company we always talk about, and we haven't even started working there yet. He's already chosen it. Carver and the girl. Instead of drawing princesses, when you look at the little girl drawing trucks, you see her mother driving something with her name on it. She sat there for a long time. Then the next morning, she grabbed the curtain of the taxi, realizing it was where she had been putting up her artwork. I tore up the photograph that had been there for 2 years, a colored pencil drawing of Lily. 3 large trucks lined up, a stick figure with yellow hair beside them, and carefully worded letters about the park below. My mother's trucks. I've seen it 100 times, and I still see it the same. They called her funeral a low-key affair. They described my entire life as a budget. I was prepared to make that baby's name more expensive than all their vacations combined. I didn't make this decision in anger. I made it consciously, as if I had deliberately set a low standard for myself. I submitted the paperwork the following week. The company was no longer owned by Daniel Carver. It was now known as Carver and Detcher Shipping. I kept his name and his daughter's name. She was gone, but I kept it too. Because some names stem from loving someone, not protecting them. Changing the company's name changed something about how I ran it. I no longer had to grieve and wait for the storm to pass. I had a desire to build, and there was a girl's name on the door, and people were lying about both. I decided to go to the anniversary party, not to the fight. I gained nothing by shouting in the room. And I wasn't planning on having a party for my parents. For some reason, I was going to lay the truth on the table in front of the assembled witnesses. Put it somewhere they couldn't miss it, or turn it into a phone call. But the truth wasn't enough with that family. They had turned my life upside down. I needed something they couldn't deny. Something with their names on it. And then I remembered the deed of gift that had sat in my closet for 4 years, there with the loan documents, both signed, clearly stating that the 40,000 was a gift, not a loan. The problem was that I wasn't sure I had a clear, legible copy, even though I knew the original was in my loan file at the bank. If I was going to show that page to 40 people, it had to be genuine, accessible to everyone, and secure, so I resorted to an undesirable solution. I called the bank and asked how a borrower could obtain a certified copy of a document from a closed loan file. The clerk told me over the phone that it would take a few days, and there would be a small fee. A few days and a small fee. That was the full price of something that would change their appearance on paper. I saw the holiday on my calendar and started counting down, not out of fear, but in preparation. The loan officer who took my file was younger than me, but he understood. I sat across from him at the table as he flipped through papers dating back 4 years. He turned a page, my mother's signature was there, and my father's signature was there. It was banking jargon, no doubt about it. The money was a gift, not to be repaid. This was not a loan in any way. They both signed at the kitchen table while I watched. I asked the officer to make a notarized copy, stamp it, and date it. Then I drove him home, lying back in the passenger seat as if it would all just disappear. All the way there, I kept saying to myself, Nathan, you're on your own now. Danielle, why do you need this now? Now I knew exactly what I needed, not money. I've never seen those 40,000 people, and I don't want to. I needed proof of our honesty, and a picture of the people they'd lied to. I didn't offer proof to shout at them, but to keep myself calm, even if they weren't lying. That's the part of finding the right path that no one tells you about. It's not the loudest voice in the room that's the loudest, but the quiet voice holding the document. If this makes you question things you remember clearly in your life, that's what 11 years of working with documents have taught me. Write it down, save the page, present the evidence, sign it, because the next part is what I've been waiting for the past 11 months. I put the notary's copy in a neat file, placed it next to my keys by the door, and waited until Saturday. While I waited, the business grew. I secured a contract to supply food, and to cover the costs, I bought a second tractor, then leased a third as the deliveries kept coming in. Now I have drivers, real drivers, men and women who left large companies because I didn't pay them enough, and I didn't lie to them. I painted the trucks dark green and wrote the name in white on both doors, the same color on each truck. Carver's truck and the girl's truck, and a little further down. You won't recognize them unless you look closely. I painted Lily's 3 drawn trucks exactly as she had drawn them. The first time I saw the 3 trucks lined up in the yard with their drawings on the doors, I had to sit in one of the trucks for a while. The broker, who doubted my readiness at the time, asked if I had the capacity to cover the excess credit. The banker who had asked me to sell quietly raised my credit limit without my request. It's astonishing how quickly he didn't allow me to say, "We'll always trust you once the cars are sold and the account is settled." I didn't applaud. I remember. The news spread like wildfire through the small town, reaching my family. Suddenly, the girl who had been alone and had no need for her money was running a real business with 3 trucks registered in her name. It was obvious. Even those who hadn't attended the funeral began to admire my writing. My mom texted me, the first happy thing in months. "We're so proud of what you've accomplished, honey," she said. "I'm so proud of what you did to earn 40 hours no Zenbalv." I didn't reply. I made sure the certified copy was still hanging on the door. I was counting down the days. My mom's copy was getting bigger and bigger as the ceremony drew closer. She stopped waiting for the bill and began defending her story. It meant more to her than money. In church, at the beauty salon, at her sister's table. To anyone who remained silent. Danielle told her sister that she had abandoned her family, that success had gone to her head, and that she had allowed tragedy, as she put it, to fester in her blood. She kept using the same phrase she'd used to ask for money, but now she was pointing at me. "We can't have a family anymore," she said, shaking her head sadly, as if I were the one going to Hawaii. As if I were the one describing a child's funeral as a trivial matter. She twisted the truth with the most beautiful words she knew, until she portrayed me as the villain. I heard all this from Renee, who simultaneously claimed to be both my spy and my friend. Renee did something I will never forget. She began telling people the truth calmly, without arguing, and without pretense. When someone was repeating my mother's story at the grocery store, Renee would say, "Soft as milk." It was strange because I was at the funeral. Brenda and Ray weren't there either, they were in Hawaii. I had the dates, and she did too. People started calculating. Some kept quiet about it. And as she does, the story she keeps repeating becomes the opposite of the truth. The ground shook beneath my mother's feet, and she didn't even notice. She thought she was going to the anniversary party to discipline her son. Little did she know that the place had already changed. It was a photograph that revealed everything. My mother, like many of her generation, realized she loved posting pictures online and didn't want to know how the dating world worked. That spring, a bright photo of them all appeared on her homepage, dry ties around their necks, friends holding hands, my nephews smiling in the breeze. The caption was all about making memories. The date and time were the day after Tom and Lily disappeared. Renee found the photo. She didn't even have to say anything harsh. She placed it next to the one from the funeral, both crystal clear, and made people look. A picture of me with a cocktail on the beach, taken the morning after the funeral of a 6-year-old. You can deduce a lot from a phone call. History cannot be retrieved. The family members who accepted my mother's version of events now have one history in one hand and another in the other, the distance between them like an ocean, and the grave of childhood. Some of them told me, coldly and regretfully, that they had never come to me, and my mother told me she would not invite them, which in itself is a lie. I didn't touch anyone's face. I calmly stated that the funeral was open to everyone, and that I was grateful to all who attended, in a measured and composed manner, preserving the warmth of my feelings for those who needed to hear them. Because the photograph, with its historical context, accomplished what hundreds of angry words could not, I asked my parents to gather witnesses to testify on my behalf. The ceremony was 4 days away, only 4 days. I did something I hadn't allowed myself to do for 11 months. I drove to the lake. Not to the crossing. I'd never go back to that crossing. To the lake by the stream, where Tom used to take Lily to jump over the rocks while she slept through the night on Sunday mornings. I went at dawn because the water was still silvery and calm. My breath didn't stink. I ignored it like I ignore a toothache. I made sure to stand there and break down my middle door. Nothing happened. I sat with my coffee in the bank, a real cup, not Tom's. I talked to them for a bit. I told Lily about the trucks painted on the doors. I told Tom I'd mentioned the company name. I told him what I had to do and asked him aloud if I was doing it for the right reasons. I sat there silently and found my answer. I didn't want my parents ruined. I didn't want Nathan's children's home destroyed. I wasn't made to enjoy other people's downfall, not even their own. I wanted it to be both simple and difficult. I wanted it documented. I wanted 40 people to know the truth, so that even if my mother described my son's death as a simple accident, there would be a hall full of people who knew the truth. I didn't want revenge. I wanted the truth to be inevitable. It turned out that the two were exactly the same for people like my family. I stopped taking responsibility for their feelings about the truth. The water remained calm and silvery. Being there for the first time didn't bother me, it calmed me. The night before the party, Ernest came. He heard what had been going on. And, like all the family, he offered to stay with me, to be in the room, to support me, and to make sure I wasn't alone with everyone else. It was a kind and gentle offer, but I refused it. Not because I didn't want him, but because I finally realized I didn't need a shield. A shield is for those willing to surrender. I didn't want to surrender. I would face the truth, with a confident face and with hands I hadn't felt in a year. To be honest, I told him the truth. If I bring a guard, it will look like a fight, and I won't fight them. I'll tell 40 people the truth and then leave. He looked at me for a long time. Then, as he had at the funeral, he shook his head, like a man who knows when to hold onto a fence post and when to stand alone. He said, "Your father never had any dignity. He's not your brother." I accepted it as a token of gratitude. After he left, I dressed for the next day, simple and dark, nothing fancy, because I wasn't dressing to please anyone. I put the notarized copy of the gift certificate in my coat pocket. I placed a folded piece of paper in my coat by the door. They wanted $40,000 back after 40 years of marriage, and I left with only one piece of paper for the ceremony. That night, I slept better than I had since the funeral. When you finally understand what you're doing, there's no room for fear. The church hall smelled of coffee, cloves, and 40-year-old cooking pots. It was beautifully decorated, a long table covered with a white tablecloth, a cake with my parents' wedding photo covered in sugar, a banner that read 40 years, in gold letters, and about 40 members of the family. I observed all this with a kind of sad irony. 40 years? $40,000, 40 people to see. My mother saw me walk in, her face a mixture of surprise and triumph, because she hadn't been sure I was coming. Now that I was, she thought I'd fallen for her trick. I kissed her hand. Nathan didn't look me in the eye. They gave me a paper cake, which I didn't eat. I waited for him because I knew what was going to happen. When you're the only one in the room who knows what's going to happen, there's silence. A toast. Then my father stood up and tapped his fork on his glass, and silence fell over the room. I saw him decide to do it in front of everyone. He thanked everyone for coming. He spoke about family, about unity, about difficult times and how a family must overcome them. Then he turned to me slowly and thoughtfully, and said that some of us are blessed, but we forget the source of that blessing. He had helped Danielle go from abject poverty to having 40,000, and now that she was earning a living, she wasn't lifting a finger to help her brother. A thump echoed through the hall. Mallory, as if perfectly in place, added her own line, sweet as poison. So loud, so sad. We missed that family's funeral too. This is Thanksgiving. A simple occasion. She pronounced the word in different ways in front of everyone. The audience in the hall looked at me. My mother sat there, confident of her victory. I put down my paper plate and stood up. I didn't raise my voice. That was the first thing I wanted to know, because it was the most important. There were 40 people ready to perform, and I gave them silence. And silence in a noisy room is very loud. I said to my father, "You're right to give me 40,000. Let's talk about that. But first, let's talk about the funeral, because Mallory brought it up." I reached into my coat pocket, pulled out a piece of paper, unfolded it slowly, and placed it on the white tablecloth next to the wedding cake. There was a printed schedule with specific dates. I pointed and said, "This is the day my wife and son were buried." Then I flicked my finger a little and said, "This is a picture on the beach my mother posted." The caption read, "The next day, dancing cocktails will commemorate the memories." I looked up and said, "You didn't miss the family funeral. You missed a child's funeral during the holidays, then returned home and demanded 40,000 from the grieving mother." Silence fell over the room. Dad opened his mouth and closed it. Mom's confidence drained from her face like water from a sink. Then Nathan did what loudmouths always do when a quiet man won't back down. He erupted in anger. He jumped up from his chair, his face flushed, shouting that I was ruining things, that the merchant was about to go bankrupt, that I owed this family something, that I was selfish, lonely, bitter, and that I loved everything. All this happened in the church hall. I let him finish. When he was panting, I put on my coat, took out the second page, a copy of the notary's document, and placed it beside the table, then threw the paper at my father on top of the book. I said, "You both signed this 4 years ago at your kitchen table. This is the gift deed the bank requested. Your signatures show it's a gift of 40,000 and no payment is expected, and there's no balance against it. I'll leave it at that. Since there's no debt, I'll file a claim to recover the money. You can ask me for it. You can't give me a receipt for a gift you swore wasn't a gift." Then I said the 3 things I wanted to say, and I said them quietly because I was exhausted. You taught Molly which occasions to attend. I'll remember that for the rest of my life. My mother's face went pale. She told me we couldn't be a family anymore. You were right. So I stopped trying to humiliate you. Then he pointed his fist at Nathan, who was standing there, and said, "Ask me why I needed you. I needed you to bury my son. You need Hawaii." No one said a word. Then there was a sound of a chair being scratched at the far end of the hall, and Renee stood up and said, "Like the sound of a bell. I was at that funeral. Everything she said is true. I have the dates." Behind me, the room shook like a truck slowly moving. Then suddenly, my aunt, whom I hadn't spoken to in years, approached me and quietly moved the gift card aside so more people could read it. Those who had been about to judge the cold, ungrateful child now looked at the timeline, the 2 autographs, and the photo on the beach, and did the only honest thing left, show their shame at what they had thought. My mother once called me by my name, Danielle, as if asking me a question, because she thought I was still sitting there eating cake. But I wasn't. My brother, Nathan, who had caused all the commotion, was standing just out of sight. I saw him for a moment. It was the perfect thing to do. He was terrified. He might lose his home, and his children would feel it. He asked the whole family to force me to cover for him. Now, instead, the family looked at him. He said, "Danny," and for the first time, he fell silent. "I'm scared." And I believed him. It was the closest any of them had come to honesty in 11 months. And I felt that old reaction, the one that filled my lunchboxes when I was a child. But I still didn't apologize to Lily. Ever. Not by name, not for that day, not even for the empty seat, because he was afraid of himself. He never felt sorry for me. Then I pressed my cheeks into my coat and told the rest of the story. I hope you understand, Nathan. Of course I understand, but you need to know without my knowledge. Then I went out into the parking lot. The air was fresh and cool. I could breathe. The story of their 40,000 debt had been lost in that aisle and never returned. They could have asked me for help, like anyone would ask anyone else. What they couldn't do after signing the tablecloth was consider it a debt. They couldn't accept a gift the giver called a gift. Those family members who were willing to repay Nathan's debt quietly closed their checkbooks as soon as they saw the dates. The merchant closed the account that fall. Now, as I heard it from everyone, as I heard it from Kieran, I heard it without any emotion in my chest. I had no contact with my parents or my brother. Not with heartfelt messages, not with shouting. I stopped responding, and after a while they stopped calling, and the silence that followed was the most peaceful thing I'd felt in years. I like people who come over. Ernest came to dinner on Sunday and sat in Tom's chair, and I agreed, because a good man should sit there. I talk to Renee weekly. Glenda is semi-retired, but she still answers me when I ask her about things. Carver and her daughter now drive 5 trucks, all dark green. They all own 3 white trucks with small bumps on the doors. You can only tell them if you look closely. People notice them. Drivers ask about them at truck stops. I call her name out loud. Lily, my daughter. I drew her. Her name is written on the side of each truck that Tom and I drive. I moved the 2 small yellow shoes. Finally, I was almost there, until I reached a shelf I could barely see, and I managed to slip out the door at exactly 4 o'clock. This spring, about a year later, I returned to the lake at dawn with some wild daisies. The water was calm, silvery, and odorless. I left them on the shore for 2 people who had truly made me. The water bag didn't burst this time either. It stayed there, holding on tight, as it always does. I didn't answer the phone then. No one would hear from me. I met people who came with nothing, and I let them go when they arrived. That's the trick. The situation has changed. That's it. Family isn't about blood ties. It's about those who come and go without purpose. That's my story. A meaningless funeral. A vacation you can't cancel. A page you sign and then forget about. If someone tells you to ignore your worst days and just get through them, consider it a sign to open your page. It means you're not guilty of anything you haven't signed up for yet. Share this with someone who needs it tonight. Let me know in the comments who encouraged you to sign up and click subscribe. See you next time.